Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Celeste Catano, who is Global Product Manager, Customs Management at Blue Jay Solutions. And today we're going to talk about how to create friction-free borders with customs management. Now, we talk a lot about, globalization in supply chain management, but when you peel back the onion on the process, you realize that it's just enormously complex. With a lot of risk associated with it. And unless you have the right people, processes, and technology to effectively manage the process, your ability to move goods across borders can literally come to a halt. So what are some of those key capabilities that companies need? What are some of the hurdles and challenges that companies need to overcome? Well, that's some of the topics that we're going to address in today's episode, and certainly great to have Celeste on the program, who has a wealth of experience and knowledge in this area, help us kind of address this topic, and provide some insights and advice on it. So Celeste, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be here.
Now Celeste, you're a first-time guest on Talking Logistics, and like I always like to do whenever we bring someone new on board is to really try to understand a little bit about their background, how and why they got involved in this whole industry to begin with. So kind of before we dive into the topic at hand, why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Blue Jay?
Yeah, well, I've been with Blue Jay and the predecessors for 40 years. So you can start from there. When I was in college, I took classes in my original degree was in math, and I switched over to computer science and managed to get a job when I graduated. And in those days, everybody, it was infancy of computers in business. So a software company would do a custom program for everybody. And we had a company approach us that was that was a customs broker. And, they asked us to put a program together for them. And then their friend needed, a similar kind of thing. So we then did theirs, and all of a sudden somebody in the company, had this bright idea of this might be a nice vertical market. And so I kind of fell into it. And along the way, I decided we were relying on our customers to tell us what we needed, and decided that, the roles needed to be reversed a bit. And so I pursued getting my customs broker license, and did get licensed. So now I feel like I have the information and the knowledge to be able to say, this is what our programs need, and not have to rely on a customer to always tell us, oh, this customs regulation is changing, we need that. So, and the rest is history. I've been doing the global stuff now for just about 4 months. And, so that's a real eye-opener as well. Because prior to that, I was just doing the U.S. So.
Yeah. Wow. That, so 40 years. So I was going to say you started when you were 10 years old. That's incredible. Yeah.
I like to say 2 now, because, now you can add the age in there, but that's.
Well, again, I always like asking this question because, it's always amazing to me how, the twists and turns that our careers take us in, right? A math background, got into kind of developing code, got into a client asking in the customs brokerage industry to kind of do a project for them. And then, here you are now, years later, and now a customs broker yourself. So I think that's a unique thing too, as well, being, in many ways, you're in the front lines of what ultimately this technology needs to do. So you understand that aspect of it, but obviously understand the technology piece as well. So great background and perspective there. So let's talk now about the topic here, and let's start with a basic question. I mean, how has customs management, changed, over the years, and what are some of the challenges and potential issues that companies face today?
Well, I think customs management has changed considerably over the years, in the fact that customs is now requesting a lot more data, and all the customs authorities, at least in major countries, are automated, and so they're expecting everything to be, full data. Really a paperless environment is what most countries are trying to achieve if they haven't gotten there yet. So it really relies heavily on the data and what ERP systems from the different organizations can provide to the to the system to be able to send that data to customs and to be able to get everything clear. Like in the U.S., for example, just over in the last few years, we now have what's called the single window, and in the single window, you now have to report data for potentially up to 15 different agencies in addition to customs, all within that one data set, to be able to provide that to customs before you can clear customs. So before you had goods that required this data, but it was the shipper that was filling out a form and sending that directly over to the agency. So now it's the brokers or the filers have to be responsible for collecting all this data and then supplying that to the agencies. Because before you can clear customs, you have to satisfy all the other agencies, and so it adds a lot more complexity on that end. And so it really requires systems to be a lot more robust than what they used to in the past.
Yeah, and I think it gets to the point of, I think it underscores, which is true in so many different supply chain processes, the importance of having timely and accurate, data and information, right? Because you miscommunicate something, or you're missing a piece of data, that brings the process to a halt.
Right. Absolutely.
And so it's interesting, kind of moving away from the paper processes, right, to more automated. I would assume that, I know when I first really started looking at this whole process, it was really after 9/11. And 9/11, I think, obviously segurity has become a bigger aspect of all this as well, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of countries have been putting in programs in place. Like in the U.S., we have CTPAT, which is a customs partnership against terrorism. And then you've got in Europe, you've got the authorized economic operator, I think is what their acronym AEO stands for. And so different countries have put these in place. And basically what they're trying to do is, if you're a good guy and you subscribe to these programs, like with CTPAT, you've got to have verification of all of your facilities. They have to meet certain security requirements. And so you go through all of these steps. And so then customs can then label you as, a good guy, a known importer, somebody that has their supply chain under control. And, they may give you benefits as you're doing your shipments. So your entries may end up with fewer examinations, okay, just by participating in these programs. So there's a lot of those kind of things that were recently introduced, that do help the importers along the way.
Right, and you kind of alluded to this, the variety of different parties that are involved in the whole process here. Now, historically, companies have relied on brokers to handle, a large part of customs management. Are you seeing, companies looking to bring more of this process in-house? And if so, what's driving it?
I think we have been seeing a number of companies that are looking to put things in-house. And typically, I think a lot of those companies, the reason they're doing it is for reducing their costs, as well as, like in the US, the importer is ultimately responsible for all of the customs compliance. So a lot of them are wanting to make sure that they're compliant and that they handle it. To me, if you're an importer that has, let's say, a very narrow range of products, where you make one widget and that's all you're doing is making this one widget, okay? In those cases, you probably can bring your compliance in-house, because once you learn what you need to do to import this widget, you're pretty much done. But if you're a mass retailer, with a wide variety of different goods, a Walmart, those kind of things, where they have a major list of components that they bring in, or items, they're not going to know all of the different regulations that customs requires for all of those different parts. So if you've got that wide variety, you really sort of need to rely on a broker whose core competency is to know everything about customs. Okay, if you're just a mom and pop type importer, you're not going to, your core competency is going to be what you need to do to make your widget. You don't want to have to deal with all of the custom stuff. So having a customs broker is definitely the way to go for companies that want to do that.
Right. I think, one of the things that I often see is just the complexity, even with things such as classifying products, right? With HTS codes. And, and I've looked at some of those systems, at the actual classification system,
Mm-hmm.
and, trying to find the right classification for something, particularly for newer products that might be relatively new, that, may fall in one or two categories. And that could be the difference between, you being able to import or export it, or the amount of duties and taxes that might be involved. So I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of complexity, even just that aspect of it, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you could have stuff that, a woman's sweater, for instance, you could have it made out of a certain type of wool, and it's classified under one number. You add a pearl button to it, and all of a sudden, now you have to worry about Fish and Wildlife, getting involved in the mix. And what do you need to be able to, to comply with them? So, you really, it's helpful to have those experts, especially, when you're introducing new products and that kind of stuff to the mix, because
right,
it's so complex.
Yeah, so let's, and we kind of started talking about it already, but, for companies that are, thinking about bringing more of these processes
Mm-hmm.
in-house, I mean, what are some of the important factors, to consider? I mean, what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff that they need to think about is more, how do they maintain those records? How do they have all of the information that they have on all of their parts and items that they're importing? Do they have all the registration numbers that they need for the different agencies? Are those, readily available? Do you, if you're looking to claim one of the preferential duty rates, do you have all of the documents to substantiate that? Do you have the proper certificates of origin that will tell you that you have the right to make those claims? And a broker would be able to, they would have checklists to say, do you have this? Do you have, they make sure that you have that. So there's a lot of those kind of things that a broker would naturally have. So an importer, if doing it themselves, would have to basically have that same type of record keeping on their side. And obviously, if they want to bring it in-house, they have to have a system that can communicate with the customs authorities. And a lot of people, will rely on companies like us to do that. In a number of years ago, a lot of companies would try to program those themselves, but the customs authorities are so complex now, and they can change on a whim. And now you're having to, get your IT folks that know about making your own widgets, having to, reprogram the systems to do customs. So, from a software side, we're seeing fewer people, doing their own anymore. But the importers would definitely need a system in order to do any of this themselves.
Right. No, it's I think even if they had their own system that they built themselves, they're a step ahead of at least from my experience, most companies out there. I mean, I remember going to a conference a few years ago, and they were literally using Excel spreadsheets as their, customs management system. And, right. Trying to get the attention of upper management in terms of how critical, important, this whole process is, and how ideally they should have a system in place that is, an enterprise grade solution versus, trying to keep Excel spreadsheets up to date, was very frustrating, for them. So I remember years further back, a VP of trade compliance at a very large multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company, I believe it was. She said, we're like at the bottom, the priority list. Our upper management just views us as paperwork, and they don't really realize, how much risk and cost and potential liability, we are responsible for. But, for people in the C-level suite, we're just paperwork.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We definitely hear that a lot. Yeah.
Right. So I think, along with the technology, obviously you have to have the upper management support and the understanding of what role this plays, of the people such as yourself that have kind of intimate knowledge of what the custom processes are. And then, obviously the right processes and integrations in place. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the technology now. I mean, what capabilities should companies look for in a customs management solution? And, obviously there's a lot of discussion these days about, global trade networks and supply chain operating networks, as I like to call them. I mean, what's the role of a global trade network as part of the process here?
Well, I think something like the global trade network, we'll start with that part first. The global trade network is really a way to tie shipper, transportation, logistics, customs, the whole supply chain all together. And what it does from the customs side is if you're doing business in X number of countries and decide that you're going to add another country, right? Our global trade network would allow you to be able to see which customs brokers are working in that space. Do we have the expertise already for those countries? And you'd be able to maybe identify a partner easily that obviously follows good practices if they're already on our network. And, so it helps connect a lot of people together from the customs part. I mean, from the transportation side, I mean, there's a lot of benefits from sourcing and saving money and that kind of stuff for the actual transportation. But I think from the customs point of view, I think a lot of it is relationships that will be there. But so going back to your first part of your question is, what kind of things should be in a global customs management system? There's a number of things. One of the key things is a denied party screening. Basically, to make sure that you're not sending goods to a company or individual that is on the sanction list. We have a system that takes care of that. We have a number of different lists that we maintain. And we can review the data, the parties that you're shipping to against those lists very easily. We also have things like document determination. If you're exporting something to a country, do you need specific licenses? Do you need any special certification to be able to export it? Okay, so that's another area. As I mentioned earlier, all of the data that needs to be collected, you need a robust parts database, item data master, so that you can store all of the data and all of the codes and things that you need for all these 15 agencies or however number of different countries that you're doing business with. You also need to look at tools that help you manage all of the dates and deadlines. In the US, for instance, you can clear customs on one day, but then you have 10 days to have to do a follow-up, what they call an entry summary. And so you have to make sure that you do that in 10 days. If you don't do it in 10 days, you're going to get fines for late filing. So you need tools that are going to help you monitor these kind of dates. And then the other thing is you need the whole system to be able to monitor your payments to customs. Are you making those payments, timely? If you don't pay on time, then you can get more fines. So, there's a lot of, those types of tools that, that really need to be in a customs management system.
Yeah, no, I think those examples you just gave, I think, kind of underscore, what I said in my opening comments. When you really start peeling back the onion on this whole process, you realize how, complex, it is, and how there's so many opportunities to, fall into pitfalls, and either incur higher than anticipated costs, or be in non-compliance situations that can have a whole host of ramifications there. I think from a global trade management or global trade network standpoint, you're right. I mean, the way I view it is, particularly because there is so many parties involved here, the ability to, from my standpoint, companies have a choice. They can either connect one-to-one with all these separate agencies and parties to exchange information, which could be, tens, if not hundreds of individual connections, or you connect once to the network and have, the network be kind of the platform where that data resides, and then give everyone access to that data and kind of power the process, through there. And to your point, the ability to discover, new partners, whether they're broker partners or transportation partners, to help, with the overall end-to-end process, I think is a pretty valuable value proposition of that part of it. So can you share with us some of the benefits that companies are achieving, using a customs management solution? And in other words, I mean, what's the business case? Going back to, the fact that upper management sometimes just uses as paperwork. I mean, if you're trying to build a business case to upper management, I mean, what are the key metrics that are impacted?
Well, this is sort of a tricky one, because one of the key metrics is not having to being compliant and not having additional fines. And so it's kind of a negative. I don't know how you would actually physically measure that, but, but some of the things that you want to be able to monitor and measure are, how quickly are you getting stuff through the borders? Are 10% of your shipments having to be stopped and being examined? If that's the case, then, work with customs to find out why you're being selected more often than the normal, the normal rate. Is it, would it be more advantageous if you joined CTPAT or something like that? So you've got, those kind of metrics. You've got, how often are your shipments being accepted directly when you send them to customs the first time? Okay. That measures whether or not you've got a good system in place. Does your system have, complete validation and edits that are stopping the data while your people are, while the data is flowing through, versus, waiting for customs to tell you have a mistake? Because if you get, 99 point whatever percent that they're going through the first time, customs will say, hey, these are good people. Let's not look at every single thing that they're doing. I mean, if every other entry is being rejected, that's something to look at too. I mean, that tells customs that, wait a minute, they have kind of a shoddy system here, and are not really looking at the details. So, so some of these things are, as far as KPIs, it's really, more just on a compliance, am I hitting it right? As far as what they could tell upper management,
Well, I think you raised some great points there, because I mean, when you look at, if your shipments are constantly getting delayed at customs, right? You're basically adding days to the overall, lead time. And you also have lead time variability, because sometimes it may be, it might take a day, sometimes it might take 10 days. And when you look at it from a lead time standpoint and lead time variability standpoint, all those things work into your inventory holding, how much inventory you hold, really as a buffer to, lead time and lead time variability. So you could actually put a dollar figure on that, because of, what's costing you having to hold extra inventory, because you just have that uncertainty around lead time and how long it's going to take to go through customs. But you're right. Sometimes, telling a CEO, well, we can prevent you from going to jail, right? Or we can prevent you from not being able to export product anymore because you're sending products to someone on the denied party list or a sanctioned party or something like that. I mean, those are all prevention, types of things that it might be a little bit more difficult to put a dollar figure on, or at least, it's not as convincing, until you actually get bit, and then you realize that, how important it was to begin with. Celeste, we're running out of time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what questions should shippers ask themselves to assess whether they have all the pieces necessary, to create friction-free borders?
Well, I think the big thing is, do they have the right data available to be able to to do that? Do they have all the right partnerships in place? Have they looked at doing CTPAT AEO? Do they have the right people in place, or the right partner in place to help them with the classification, with the assessment of the countries of origin? Do they have all the pieces that that customs is looking for? For multi countries, companies, can they use the export data from one country as import data to the next? Okay, do you have that data available that'll help transition and move things smoothly? A lot of countries are now trying to with the U.S. and Mexico. I mean, we're doing a lot more with them. Trying to smooth the transition of that data, and so we'll see how that all plays out. But unfortunately, at this point, I think data is a big part of this whole thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we mentioned it before, right? There's so much data, knowledge, information that's required in really, smoothing the whole process of getting goods through borders. And I think what adds to the complexity is the fact that a lot of this information is continuously changing, right? Whether it's the actual denied party lists or, the regulations themselves. Obviously, companies are adding new products all the time, adding new countries into their supply chains all the time. So it's a very dynamic and ever-changing process that, companies have to, keep a pulse on. I think it goes back to, some of the other things we talked about, the importance of relationships and collaboration with brokers, transportation providers, and other stakeholders in this whole process. Celeste, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics. And particularly in this case, it's such a complex topic that it's impossible to get through it all in just, a few minutes here. But I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to at least, provide some good insights and advice, and to get companies thinking about, what it takes to really succeed in customs management.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you to those of you who joined us today. If you are watching this episode on demand, either on the Talking Logistics website or on the Blue Jay Solutions website, and you've got a question or comment for Celeste, you can post a comment or a question there, and I'm sure she'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.